that was method 1, which is the one I'd recommend using because I think it's easier and most likely faster than method 1 or method 2. I'm going to show method 2 because it shows that there are multiple ways to solve the same problem, and also that the one you come up with first might not be the best method, because I came up with this method first and it's bad, which you'll see why, because it uses List.Accumulate, which is a heavy function, and it also introduces an error which I have to handle. And here I only want to extract the first 2 rows, which I could do with a bunch of methods, but the one I'll be showing is just to say I know that my first, like this, will be using the buttons instead of saying specifically grab me row 1 and 2. So now I want to have a table with only 2 rows in it, instead of doing the method here where I convert the first row into a table and then the second row into a table. So here I'm just filtering instead and saying, well, I know that column 1 includes person, but I also want another one. And this is where it's a little bit tricky because I want the second row, but this could change a bit depending on if you have more columns. So right now I'm just going to say that if column 2 includes the value 1, then I want to keep that row. And this is why I never use this, because it's just annoying to me. I'd rather just write that because I know exactly what to write. But then I want to add a column, a comment to say that this can be a problem. And here I'm using a trick where the slash asterisk slash is to make multi-line comments, but I don't actually need to have the comment on multiple lines. But the problem is if I just add a comment like normal after the parentheses, then it gets removed. But if I add normal columns with the double slash before this parentheses, well, then it will break because the parentheses is part of a comment now. So I'd need to add the parentheses to a new line to make it understand, but that's ugly because why have a parentheses on a new line? So I can just use the multi-line comment because this has a way to end the comment. And again, I would much rather do the method here where I say I'm specifically grabbing these particular rows. That was actually up here, where I say get me row 0, index position 0, and get me position 1. But I'm just again showing that there are always multiple ways to do stuff. For instance, you could use the Table.FromRecords function, which would be better, because I know that filtered rows 0 is the one I want, but this is a record, and I need to convert that into a table, and I can just do that in one step. So this is method 1 to do with the filtered rows, which again has this problem because what if the name of column 2 or column 1 changes? Well, then the whole thing breaks. But instead I can just be lazy and copy paste and say instead I want to grab the 0th row from my source step, and I want to grab my first row in my source step, and then use the table from records to turn my my list of 2 records into a table, which again is functionally the same, but now you don't have to do the filtering and worry about column names. And this works because I know for a fact that I always need to grab the information from index 0 and index 1. So this is just another method. And I think it's very beneficial to see just how many ways you can handle these problems. And just as before, I want to do a transpose, because this gives me the information I need in order to do my calculated column. And in this case, I'm going to keep person and null and show what I mentioned before with the if function. So I want to call that date combi, and I want to say if the value in column 1, if that's equal to person, then I just want to pass in the value person. Else I want to do that date combi, and I'm just going to be lazy and copy that because you've already seen that. And in this case, I'm not doing that. I probably need another parentheses. Yeah, I'm just doing the same thing as before, where I'm saying date from text, because I want the column to be date. I want to grab the text from column 2, because this can be a number. Well, it is a number except when it's null. Add a dash, grab the value from column 1, which is text. And then grab the text from the year portion from the date portion from datetime local now. And actually, I just want to see if I can remove that date from. Yeah, you actually can that. So you don't, if you just need the year portion, you don't need to convert the local now into only the year portion, because this is the date time. So of course I can get just the year portion. So now I have my column names, and that means I can just delete everything else, because these are now my new columns. And then I can add another step where I just grab the raw table, because that's the one I want to work on. And now I'm just going to grab the column names from this table. I should call that. And then I want to say I want to only get the column names now, because I want to use the List.Accumulate. So I need to get my list of current columns. So that is fine. And then I have my removed other columns. This is currently a table, which I can convert into a list, which I would assume that there is a Table.ToList, because I don't need this to be a date, so I may as well turn it into a list. And now it gets mad. Yeah, okay, it just straight up wanted me to do what I was going to do in the step anyway. And now it yeah, it deleted my steps, so that was annoying, because I can just do that date combi, and now that's a list. But I wanted to use the Table.ToList function just to show it. But now I have to go back and say I want to grab the raw table, and I wanted to only get the column names, because now I have two lists, and they have the same number of columns, or rather the same number of rows, which is important. But they're always going to have the same number of rows, because they're based on the same data set of raw. So this is fine, and now I have my column names. And now I need to convert these two into a list of lists, so I can use my List.Accumulate. There are other methods like turning it into a list of record, I think it's called, but I like this method more. So I need the List.Zip function to convert two lists into a list of lists. And again, I have to pass in a list or lists, so curly brackets, and then I have the column names, which is column. So column names from raw. Yeah, it needs that too. Yeah, so now I have a list, but I only have one, but I wanted to do List.Zip. So I will call that one. Yeah, that was removed other columns. And now I have my list of lists. So I can now say I want to loop through this list, and I want to grab the value in the first item and say, is my column name equal to this? Well, then I want to replace it with the second item. And then go to the next row and say, is my column header equal to this value? Then replace it with that. And this is going to give me a mistake, which I will solve, but I just want to show how easy it is to make mistakes, and why double looping can be very, very terrible, especially when you're doing this, but we will get to that. So now I'm just going to be lazy and just copy paste it, because you've already seen this function, and that was called getRawTable. GetRawTable. This is exactly as before, where I just replaced the nulls with 999, and I'm using the column names. So I'm doing it on every column, which means it's dynamic. And now I can do my List.Accumulate function, where I want to say for each column in this table, I want to loop through my list of lists, and again say, is the column name equal to this? Then replace it with that. And like I said, this is going to break, but it's it was very confusing to me when I saw this first, and I didn't get why this happened, but you will see that real quick why. So my table is custom 1 and I need to change that name. And I want to say for each column name in my table, I want to use the List.Accumulate function. And then here, yeah, you can't do that every single time I try to hit the tab, but it doesn't want to. Custom 1, just so we can see the table again. I want to say I want to loop through my table list of lists, and my current value, my seed, my starting value is then the underscore, because I'm saying for each column name, I want to grab the current column name. And my function, like always, is state comma current, goes towards, and then the function I want is text replace, because I want to say look for the value. So state is now my current text, which is my current column name. So go through my current column name, say, can I find the old text, which is then current, which was position 0 in the list. If I can find this text string within my column name, then I want to replace that text string with text.from, because that was a date, and then current 1. And person is fine, and this is fine, and all of this is fine. But then I get some very, very weird situations. Right, the 8th of 1st, 2023, which is my 9th column. Then when I get to my 10th column, it's called person 0 and person 1 and person 2. And when I get all the way to the end, my 20th row, well, 20th column, it says the 1st of January 2023 0. So this is in the year 20,230. And I was very confused what was going on here. And I had this in another, in a VBA, in VBA, where I also needed to replace values. And the problem comes because of what the text replace function does. It doesn't do an exact match. I can't say if the current rows, that is the current column name, is exactly identical to this string, then I want to replace the whole string and make it into this, which is what I want. I want to say if the column name is column 20, then I want to find the value column 20 inside this list and replace with that. But that's not what happens. The function goes through my list here, and for each row it says, is my column name equal to column 1? No, because its name is column 20. But column 2 is a substring found within the whole string column 20. So the column 2 portion of column 20 gets replaced with this, which means column 20 becomes 01-01-2023 and then a 0, because that's a leftover. So the way to solve this is simply to sort your list, which you can do with reverse items. And this will always work, because I know for a fact that the way I generate this list is I go from left to right. So column 1 first, then 2, then 3, and so on. So in my case, I had 260 columns, but when I reverse the items, column 260 comes before column 26, which comes before column 2, so I don't run into that problem. So literally the only thing I have to do is just reverse this, which will generate a new step. But I can just grab the code, because I don't want to have that extra step. That's kind of pointless. So I'm just reversing that step, or the list, which means column 20 comes up first. So this now means that I am looking at the column 20 name, and when I find that, I replace that with the corresponding value, which means when I get to column 2 and say, can I find column 2 within this column header? No, I can't. Okay, skip. And because this is List.Accumulate, it doesn't stop once I've done my replacement. So I can't say, like, if you've changed the name of the column, stop. which means that for every single one of my columns, I need to loop through a list that is as long as the number of columns I have. So if I have 260 column names, for each of these column names, I need to loop through a list of 260 column names, which means I have to perform an operation, about 70,000 times. So this is a terrible performance. And again, this was the first method I came up with, so I need to change that in my work file, because this should be a lot slower than this method. But again, it can be very beneficial to try different methods, but it's just because I really like List.Accumulate, because it does exactly what I needed to do. To remove these first two rows, you could do that, remove top rows, but that's fine. And then just as before, I can do my unpivoting other columns, and again this is dynamic because it's only looking at the person column, and I call that type in the other one. And then once again I need to replace 999 with null, and I could, so these two methods have the same output. Technically I guess this one has fewer steps because I have both this query and then these queries refer to it, so it's actually about twice as long roughly, but that doesn't really matter. You should use this method because it's a lot easier to understand, and it's going to be way better in terms of performance, because this has List.Accumulate, which means double looping, which means even though I've already changed the name of the column, it's still going to keep checking. And you have the potential issue of what if you have a column 260 and column 26 and column 2, you need to reverse the items, which you don't have to do with this method. So absolutely use this method. But again, I wanted to include this to show that your first method is not necessarily going to be the correct one. But that was all from me. Actually, we can see if it's slower. I don't think I have enough data for it to be slow. But yeah, that was everything. Hi. Yep.